Welcome to Chapter 5 of Leroy Ninker Saddles Up. So last week we read that Leroy, he got Maybelline, and there were 3 rules about Maybelline. And rule number 1 was that you had to give her lots of compliments. Rule number 2 was that she ate lots of food. And rule number 3 is that Maybelline gets lonesome really quickly. So remember last week, he rode Maybelline home, and then he couldn't get her inside his apartment. He lives in an apartment building, and the door isn't big enough for Maybelline because she's much too big to fit. So this week, we're going to figure out what happened to Maybelline. Did he get her into the apartment? And the decoding strategy that I want to focus on this week is I want us to look at the different sounds that the letter O can make. So as we go through, there are going to be words that are underlined that have O's in them. And we're going to talk about the different sounds that you could try when you're reading. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 5. Leroy Ninker went into the kitchen of Unit 12. And then I have my first O word. So remember, O can say ah, it can say O, and there are a couple other sounds that we'll talk about later. But mostly we can try ah and O to see which one makes more sense. So I can try opened, but that doesn't sound quite right. So I'm going to try the other way. Opened. That's a word I know. He opened the refrigerator and looked inside. Leroy had viewed many, many westerns at the Bijou Drive-In Theater. He had seen a great deal of purple mountains and wide open plains. He had watched cowboys battling injustices and crossing. It could, well, I know that word. It could be crossing. It could also be crossing. Which one makes more sense, crossing or crossing? Crossing does, right? So let's start our sentence over. He had watched cowboys battling injustices and crossing rivers and eating beans. But he could not recall one movie where a cowboy said, this OU right here, this is a special sound. OU together is going to say ow. Like, ow, that hurts. So whenever we see this OU together, we can say ow. He could not recall one movie where a cowboy said aloud exactly what it was that he was feeding to his horse. Hey, said Leroy. He lifted up his hat and scratched his head. Here's another special OA. A lot of the time, OA together is going to say O. Oats. But he didn't have hay, and he didn't have oats. Dag flibber, said Leroy Ninker. Outside of Unit 12, Maybelline let out a long, loud whinny that had a question mark on the end of it. Okay, Leroy shouted. Leroy shouted to the horse. I am making you some grub. Yippee-i-o. Leroy grabbed a big pot and filled it with water. He turned the heat on high. He filled another pot with tomato. Doesn't really seem to work, so let's try tomato. I know that word. It sounds like tomato, right? He filled another pot with tomato sauce. Patty Lamarck had said nothing about whether or not Maybelline liked spaghetti, but didn't everyone like spaghetti? After Leroy Ninker added the noodles to his pot, he went outside and leaned up against his horse. Her flank was very warm. She was an extremely comforting horse to lean against. Maybelline turned her head and looked at Leroy, and then she put her nose up in the air and sniffed. That's right, said Leroy. I am cooking you some grub. Maybelline whinnied. It's spaghetti, said Leroy. I hope you like spaghetti. It turned out that Maybelline did like spaghetti. She liked a lot of spaghetti. The horse ate the first pot of noodles in a single gigantic gulp. As far as Leroy could tell, she didn't even bother. Bother? I don't know. How about bother? As far as Leroy could tell, she didn't even bother to chew. When she was done, Maybelline lifted her head from the pot and looked at Leroy in a meaningful way. Leroy said, "Yippee-yi-yo!" and he went running back into Unit 12 with the empty pot and started boiling more water. He opened another jar of tomato sauce. He made a second pot of spaghetti. After that, he made a third pot of spaghetti. By the time Maybelline was done eating, the stars were shining in the sky and the moon was looking down, and there was not one noodle of spaghetti left in Unit 12. Leroy Ninker was very tired. He leaned against his horse and looked up at the stars. But when he closed, that makes more sense. But when he closed his eyes, what he saw was Patty Lamarck. Her face was as big as the moon, and her mouth was opening and closing and opening and closing, and Leroy knew exactly what she was saying. Patty Lamarck was reciting item 3. "Maybelline," said Leroy. Maybelline turned and put her nose in Leroy's face. "I have remembered item 3, said Leroy Ninker. "Item 3 is that you are the kind of horse who gets lonesome. Item 3 is that you are the kind of horse who gets lonesome quick." Maybelline nickered. "But you cannot fit inside Unit 12, said Leroy. Maybelline shook her head. "Okay then," said Leroy, "I will stay here with you." He took off his boots, he removed his lasso, he loosened his belt, and then he laid down at Maybelline's feet. He put his hat over his eyes. He sighed a happy sigh. "I have made a lot of mistakes in my life," said Leroy Ninker from underneath his hat. "I have done some things that I wish I had not done. I have taken some wrong turns." There was a long silence. Leroy moved his hat and looked up at Maybelline. The horse looked down at him. She was listening. "There was a time in my life when I was a thief," said Leroy. "I am now reformed. I hop, you don't, I'm not sure. How about I hope you." See, those are both real words, hop and hope, but you have to look at the rest of the sentence to see which one really makes sense. So let's keep going. It could either be hop or hope. And then we have this other word, don't, or don't. Don't makes more sense there, right? So I hop you don't judge me, or I hope you don't judge me. Probably I hope, right? That makes more sense. I hope you don't judge me, Maybelline, because I truly am a changed man. Maybelline let out a small chuff of air. "Oh, Maybelline," said Leroy, "you are my horse. For me you shine brighter than every star and every planet. You shine brighter than the universe's moons and suns. There are not enough yippee-yi-yos to describe you, Maybelline. I love you." Leroy Ninker had never imagined that he could string so many words together at once. It was the longest speech of his life. He looked up at Maybelline, and she looked down at him. Leroy's cheeks felt hot. He lowered, or lowered. That makes more sense. He lowered his hat so that it covered his face. "Good night, Maybelline," he whispered. Leroy closed his eyes. He thought very hard. Had his heart been waiting for Maybelline to come along so that it could open wide and he could speak all the beautiful words that had been hiding inside of him? It was an amazing concept to consider, and the cowboy fell asleep considering it. So, as you guys are working on your reading this week, I want you to keep in mind that when you see an O, there are a few different sounds an O can make. So a regular O that just looks like this can either say O, like in lowered, or it can say aw, like in octopus. Then we learned that OA, usually, if they're together, it usually makes the sound O, like in oat or boat. We also learned that OU together usually says ow, like ow, out, or mouse. Okay, so as you guys are working and as you guys are reading, keep in mind that you can try out a lot of different sounds when you see an O. Don't give up after just trying one. You can try lots.